and welcome to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is TNC in Massachusetts webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers from New England and around the world. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Allison Bowden, Director of Rivers, Coasts, and Oceans at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, and your host. Today, we're joined by award-winning underwater photographer and visiting artist at MIT Sea Grant, Keith Ellenbogen, and Dr. Brian Helmuth, Professor of Marine and Environmental Sciences at Northeastern University. Keith and Brian have formed a dynamic collaboration to increase environmental awareness about our local marine ecosystems. We'll talk about the intersection between art and science and how photography is being used as a medium to inspire conservation. As you think of questions for Keith and Brian, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Thanks so much for joining today. Let's dive in. Over to you, Keith and Brian.
Hi, everyone. Nice to virtually meet everyone. I'm just going to share my screen, so just give me 1 second here. And can everyone see this? And
I'll just quick say hi, then dive off while Keith starts us off.
Does everyone see this? Just get a quick yes.
We do,
Yes,
Keith.
we can see it.
Looks good.
Okay, great. Hi, all. So I just wanted to start with a little context. So first, my name's Keith Ellenbogen, and thank you, Allison and Liz, for inviting me here today. I'm from the Boston area and grew up here. And when I was 16, just to give you a sense of things, I volunteered at the New England Aquarium and started to learn about the role of the oceans. And that same year, my grandfather, who's an amateur photographer, gave me my first camera. For those of you that remember, it's a Nikonus 5 film camera. And I remember exploring along the coast of New England, learning about the animals and taking pictures and the challenges of the photography to tell the stories of what I saw and to bring back. And in those days, it was great. You take a picture and it was really exciting. You thought you got a great shot, and then you have to wait a week for the film to get developed and to see how you actually did. From those days of early beginning and just loving diving, loving exploring, and loving seeing things, I've been fortunate to travel around the world on different conservation photography assignments. This picture here is in Totoya Islands in Fiji, in a remote island. And this is one of those dream assignments where I was fortunate to have access to a helicopter and was able to get a number of hours up in the air. And so I would go down diving, try and take some pictures, and then come back to the boat and jump on the helicopter, and we'd go up, staying low enough that I was below the altitude. And what I wanted to share with you is a little bit about what it's like to take these pictures and what you're looking for. This is a unique image, I think, because it shows what a barrier reef is like. It's the waves you can see here being absorbed by the corals. And I spent a lot of time flying around the helicopter, waiting for the clouds to be right, to get the right angle, to get the right distance, so that I could encapsulate an entire barrier reef around an island to give you this visual impression. Some of the other conservation stories I've been on and have traveled is here in Mexico. I was doing a story on local fisheries and fishing, especially on lobsters. And we had, as in so many instances, bad weather. And during the days of bad weather, I observed this really rare phenomenon where these juvenile frigate birds were diving consistently in the water in a similar spot. So I decided to take my camera, preset the focus, position myself, and go in the water and see if I would get lucky. I spent 2 days after this picture, in which the frigate bird has this amazing ability where they fly. They can't actually land in water, so they fly. They come in really slow, then they catch their prey and then go. It was the only picture I was prepared to actually take this day. And in a lucky moment of being ready for something, of just standing there, the bird comes in, I take my picture, it catches the fish. I look back at the assistant and I say to myself, oh my God, I think I got it. But I was so nervous to what happens when you look at this thing. So I look back at the camera, I thought I had it. And then, I waited, I tried to get a few other pictures, but it didn't happen again. This was one of those super rare moments. And when I went back into the camera, I was able to see this. And it shows what art and time and photography can go about when you observe something and learn to look for things and then begin to photograph them. In other instances, I was in the Amazon River on a project looking at tropical fish in the Amazon. And we were able to photograph a pink river dolphin. And I like this because this picture will illustrate what the art of photography for me is. There's this beautiful ambient light and the suns are racing through the water, giving the pink river dolphin this sort of angelic feeling. And so I spent a lot of time sort of composing in a quick moment of when all the action really begins to happen. But just as comparison, I want to show you what happens when you take a picture with just a GoPro camera or with any kind of camera that you're not setting all of these things, while still maybe a beautiful picture that we're close to this river dolphin, a very curious animal that has this unbelievable ability to be flexible. You lose the charm of the light, the artistic of what is really there and how you communicate the environment and nature. And one of the things I want to just highlight for a minute is transitioning from around the world. Really, the focus of a lot of my work right now is in New England and the local environment. Currently, I'm working as what's called a Ernest F. Hollings Ocean Awareness Award. It's a multi-year project to raise awareness about New England's marine wildlife, specifically within Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, which is one of 15 sanctuaries in the United States, special places. And we have all sorts of amazing animals. And one of the most amazing animals that I'm trying to photograph is a basking shark. And for those of you that don't know, a basking shark is the world's second largest shark, a plankton feeder. So it feeds on just small little things drifting through the water. And in New England, relative to other parts of the world, the visibility is much more difficult. Here on a good day, I'd be lucky to have 25 feet. And in most days, I would say it's 5, 10 feet, maybe even no feet of visibility. From the surface on this dreamlike day, I began to see a fin break the water. And we observed it for a while, and I assumed it was a basking shark and was with a whole group of people. And we all thought this was a basking shark that was making all of the behaviors. So I slip into the water with a snorkel, a mask, and a 360-degree immersive camera. And I begin to swim towards the animals. But wildlife photography is about special things. And I thought I would share with you 17 seconds of seeing one of the most extraordinary animals that I've ever been fortunate to encounter. Here you can see the pointy snout, the white underbelly, that this is no longer this beautiful basking shark, but rather an enormous great white shark. It was a 17-foot great white shark that was later identified as large March. Oops. Let me see if I can just stop this from looping around. Maybe not. Yeah, let's see. And one more time. Let's see. Yeah, it was large March. Was known shark. Greg Scommel had ID'd it about 4 years ago. And until then, it hadn't been seen. And so we estimated size at about 17 feet and 3,000 pounds. So really a huge shark, bigger than the skiff that I was on. And what this shows is that there's, extraordinary animals. And as a wildlife photographer, I did the only thing I really knew how to do, which is just brace myself and hold this camera steady. And if you could see me, which you could in the 360 rendition, it's a multi-camera system. You would see me tuck my feet in close and just sort of go by this animal and to get this. And so of all the places I've been, really, this is what it looks like when you can see me. I'm on the right-hand side, and then you can see the shark there coming through. But really, New England has many amazing animals. We have mola mola, we have giant schools of mackerel, we have the basking sharks, great white sharks, and many things that people aren't aware of. And I've been dedicating myself now to photograph and document this incredibly diverse area that few people really realize exists. And one of the things that photography, well, we realize they exist, we just aren't as familiar that they're in our local waters. But one of the things that photography can really do is help us contextualize not only the animals that we see, but a historical understanding of the way they used to be perceived and their size. This is a picture I particularly like. It's taken in the late 1800s of Ernest Hemingway and with a large tuna. And you can see the tuna here is enormous, weighing up to about 1,300 pounds. And you can see the description of the book in which we perceive language of like conquering and the beauty of describing this like magnificent animal, and at the same token our hunting of it and killing it, and here our photo of it out of the water in this sort of unnatural environment. Dead is a metaphor. But now in a conservation world, really, not only do we want to document these things, I want to be able to convey them in their environment. And so I spent 3 months in the Mediterranean Sea trying to photograph bluefin tuna. And this was one of those rare moments where the tuna came in close to me. Now, in a modern world, they don't grow as big as they did. They're just not there. I mean, there may be a few, but for the most part, they're just not that big. These ones were about 8-9 feet long and maybe about 900 pounds compared to the 1,500 pounds of the way they used to be. And so photography can help juxtapose what life is, a snapshot in time, and the way things were. This was one of those amazing moments where when it swam by me, just to give you a sense of what it's like in the water with a bluefin tuna, they're so fast, so agile, so maneuverable that I could feel the ripple of its like in a bass in a concert, the sound coming through your chest when it swam past me and hit the go button is so powerful. The waves actually reverberated through my chest and almost really pushed me back away. And so there's all these extraordinary animals that here migrate from New England into other parts of the world. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Brian Helmuth and transition here for a little bit.
Thanks, Keith. I'm Brian Helmuth. I'm a marine biologist at Northeastern University. Keith and I have been working together for a couple of years now, and he's always a really hard act to follow with his absolutely amazing images. I want to pick up on this point that Keith was starting to discuss about changing perceptions of nature and how that influences conservation. This is really at the core of a collaboration of which Keith and I are a part with other collaborators whose work I'll show you in a minute. So it won't surprise anybody on this call that increasingly people have incredibly divergent views of their environments, the realities even, and especially here in the US. And this is particularly true for how we view nature, how we value nature, and ultimately it's perceptions of our role in the natural world that drive ideas and commitment to stewardship, and specifically whether we perceive ourselves as part of nature or as separate from it. If I have the next slide, please, Keith. So this is reflected in the academic literature and more broadly in how we talk about nature, how we talk about conservation. So it wasn't too long ago that most of our discussions centered around human impacts in the environment and how we needed to protect the environment, which of course we all know is really important. And so most of this focused on the intrinsic value of nature independent of humans. And while this still, of course, holds very true, it's potentially problematic in that people who have different perceptions and values of nature may not view this in a way that ends up protecting nature. So if you view nature only in this extractive viewpoint, as shown by Keith with Hemingway, it doesn't draw in everyone. And so eventually that moved into this idea of a coupled natural human system, where not only do we impact the environment, but anything we do to nature turns around and kicks us in the butt. It's that backwards flow that nature, of course, has intrinsic value, but also has instrumental value. That example that Keith showed of the barrier reef is a very tangible example of why protecting coral reefs is very significant benefits to humans because of the ecosystem services that this provides. Over time and fairly recently, this has evolved into an idea of a relational view, one that humans are an inseparable part of nature, and that this is even true in urban environments, in places where we don't particularly think of it as nature per se. But it moves away from this idea of nature just being something that we go and we visit and we come back from, but rather we're part of it. And so even in an urban environment, we're part of nature. So next slide, please, Keith. So the team with which Keith and I have been working includes landscape architects and cognitive scientists. And together we've been trying to ask these questions about how people perceive their environment, how we can use that understanding to influence those perceptions using visualizations. And a lot of this has been the work of colleagues of ours who are two cognitive psychologists, John Coley at Northeastern University and Nicole Betts, who is now at Yale University. And they focus on this idea of cognitive construals. So these are these pervasive, intuitive frameworks of thinking about our world. They are used almost as a shorthand in many cases to predict and explain the world around us. They've evolved over time, and so often they're useful and correct, but often they lead to systematic misconceptions. Things like racism and homophobia have the root in these kind of fast ways of thinking about the world that don't require deeper thinking. And it's because people fill in their gaps in understanding with kind of these construal consistent guesses that are based on things like stereotypes or assumptions about a person or an object or an event. Next slide, please, Keith. One example of this is called human exceptionalism. And this is work especially that Nicole has done. And human exceptionalism, the idea that people are discontinuous from the rest of the world, that humans are biologically unique, and that therefore we're not subject to natural laws or processes. So for example, when asked about the role of climate change, a lot of Nicole's work has shown that many people perceive the quote unquote natural environment as being susceptible to nature, but that ultimately humans will find a technological solution to fix it. And so, while to some degree this is true, we are unusual species largely because of the amount of the footprint we have. In other ways, it's obviously not true. This idea that humans are the most highly evolved species doesn't necessarily hold. Next slide, please. So what we've done with this group led by Keith and Nicole is to ask people's views on nature, to quantify the degree to which they have exceptionalist thinking, and then ask how does that influence the perception of the natural environment in urban environments, specifically around urban waterways. And so, for example, we have asked, to what extent do you think the river impacts people in the city? And to what extent do you think the behaviors of the people in the city impact the river? And what we find is this exceptionalist viewpoint strongly influences the degree to which people think the river influences people versus people influencing the river. Next, please, Keith. And so what it identifies is this disconnect in the coupled natural human system framework where everybody gets that people impact urban waterways, but fewer of them understand that what happens to those urban waterways inevitably end up impacting people. And so this feedback is missing from their consciousness of their construal of the environment. Next, please, Keith. So the question we get at in our group is, can we use visual arts to influence people's perception of nature, and specifically this idea that we're an integral part of nature, that we don't escape from it just when we go into an urban environment. And Keith's beautiful photographs are a way to do that. So I want to transition into a case study that Keith and I have been doing. If you can go to the next slide, please. That takes place in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And I think most people are familiar with this. This is embedded in the American psyche. Plymouth is one of the places where Europeans first established a foothold in North America. There are these apocryphal stories of interacting with the Wampanoag people at Plymouth Rock. Next slide, please. And if anybody has visited Plymouth recently, that right near where Plymouth Rock sits in its sad little hole, the town brook travels into the ocean, and it's this conduit that we're studying between land and the ocean that goes through an urban environment, because it's really a perfect example or metaphor of people's perceptions of nature in an increasingly urbanized environment, and in a place where really it could be argued that urbanization started in what is now the United States with this particular river. Next, please, Keith. So what we're studying are these absolutely amazing animals. The blueback herring, alewife are also in the area. They're morphologically very similar. We've all heard these stories. These fish have played for thousands of years, a really vital role in the lives of the Wampanoag people. We've all heard the stories about how the pilgrims were taught to plant corn with herring. And for many, many years, these are an incredibly important ecologically and economically important species. These amazing fish traverse between the ocean and land. If you want to think of it as invading land, it's one of the few places where we can see an ocean animal in very shallow water. And they make this amazing annual migration of about 1.6 miles up from the Atlantic into what's called the Billington Sea. The next slide, please, Keith. So these animals are amazing, and Keith is going to show you more of his photographs of these in a minute, but they're this perfect example of this stubborn animal that, despite all the changes that humans have wrought on our environment, still managed to make this migration every year. The difference is that the numbers in which these have been able to do so have changed radically depending on the habitat. So next slide, please, Keith. This is this amazing story where the town of Plymouth has been working with the NOAA Fisheries Habitat Restoration Center to restore this habitat by removing these dams, some of which were built in the 17th century, to restore the habitat for the herring to make their way back up into the area where they spawn. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Keith to show you some of the images that he's taken, and then we'll come back at the end and tell you what we're doing with those pictures.
Just to share, so this is a surface level perspective. Now, the river herring are this fish that I have just totally fallen in love with, and their story is absolutely incredible. They're one of the few marine animals that come from the ocean through the rivers in a place that people can see them. And Town Brook in Plymouth is one of those extraordinary spaces. And there you can think of them almost like the salmon in the West Coast. We hear of this extraordinary fish migration, but these happen here on the East Coast. And what happens is each year the fish come through the river, and you can see they're so dense here in the number that they change the surface of this stream by their sheer numbers as they race upstream. And they come in, they change from salt water to fresh water. They fight this incredibly strong current and arrive into Town Brook. And you can see here, if you look closely, this is the water at if you can see my mouse over here, you can see the ripples of the little shiny parts are the fish, but you can see it's dammed. And unfortunately, in a lot of these areas in modern world, the rivers have been dammed to the lake where they're trying to go spawn. And through many conservation efforts there, and Plymouth is really a leader in this, they have established fish ladders and altered the contour to make this right for the fish to be able to swim and do their migration to restore their populations to the way that they used to be. And you can see here, just of a sheer marvel of an animal. They swim this 1 mile or a little over a mile, changing their body from saltwater to freshwater. They are able to fight this incredibly strong current. And here they fight upstream. And you can imagine, I've been in this current right here. It's so powerful, it like pushes me away. They swim all the way up, and then they finally get to a peaceful kind of place here where they launch, where they arrive in smooth water. And then that yellow thing is just a barrier to prevent any leaves or logs from blocking their entrance out into the water. They can swim right under it. It's completely open. And then they go into the lake. And here to just give you a sense of these beautiful fish, their sheer numbers of them all coming right at you as they swim. And for me anyway, most people just consider them herring, they say shad, they say silverfish. But if we really begin to look and appreciate, we can see the beautiful coloration. They have this like golden really glow to them that's just so wonderful, and it changes ever so slightly. You can see the scales of them shift as it juxtaposes the really strong current of the water that it's racing down. And so I just find their story really remarkable here. And as they begin to swim up over, and just as a last burst of speed as they race over, this is an underwater view of one as it looks through at the sky and the houses in the background as the herring go through. and into the lake where they spawn, reproduce. And unlike salmon, I just want to highlight, they return back into the ocean and then do this several years in a row. That said, I'd like to retransition over to Brian here.
Thanks, Keith. If you can just put up the four sections there. What we want to finish with is talking about this larger group, that the team of which Keith and I are part, that are trying to use these images to influence pro-environmental behavior, conservation behavior, drawing from a number of experts. So we talk largely about, I'm coming this from the marine environmental science perspective, Keith is coming up from the visual arts, but we also have experts in architecture and urban design, led by Dan Adams, and I've already talked a little bit about the cognitive science side. But it's putting all these pieces together that is where we're really getting excited about this, and where our kind of nascent collaboration is going with this. So I have the next slide, please, Keith. So this is a list of the people involved in the team. We're just now ramping this up, and we're calling it the Cognitive Laboratory of Environmental and Arts Research, or CLEAR. But this is a wide range of experts from different fields and students, graduate and undergraduate students involved in this project. And we're working together to use visualizations, not just to get people to understand the amazing organisms that live around them, but also to serve as an aspirational view of what could be with things like habitat restoration. So what we want to finish with is one case study that we've been working with. The next slide, please, Keith. That is part of, if anybody lives in Boston, you know, the Emerald Necklace. The Emerald Necklace was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted in the 19th century. It's the same person that designed Central Park in New York. And it's this series of parks that are contiguous with one another, running through Fenway and empty into the Charles River, but over time have become buried. And so a lot of the work that Dan and his group are doing is trying to surface these otherwise hidden waterways, the Muddy River and the Stony Brook, which flow through these series of parks and empty into the Charles River. And now, the next one, please, Keith. The end of this is in Charles Gate that looks like this. I mean, this is the end of the river that flows through a culvert into Charles Gate. And so those surveys that I showed you before that John and Nicole put together are asking local residents about their perceptions of nature. But our goal is to try to get people to understand what could be. And so what we're doing is using these amazing animals from Plymouth as aspirations for what Charles Gate could be. And this is a project in which Dan is involved with the city, state, and federal officials to renovate Charles Gate to daylight it. And we're doing so by literally superimposing these images on built structures. So the next one, please, Keith. And I'll join you, Keith, to jump back on this. We're taking pictures like you see on the left of the herring and projecting them on things like bridges to get people to understand the connections between the urban environment and nature. And I think we have a video showing this next, right? Yeah. So this is an example that is on the mill in Town Brook, showing some of these herring pictures where it's projected onto the side of the building. Right before COVID hit, we ran a series of tests. We went down there, showed these on the side of the mill and under bridges, had plans to project them as part of a migratory fish festival, to project them in Boston, and COVID hit. And so what we ended up doing was trying to pivot to doing more online to understand perceptions, but we're all set to go, and we're hoping that, you know, as soon as we all get vaccinated and can get back out there again, we really are excited to try to test this out, and to see if we can really change hearts and minds using these projections. So Keith, do you want to take over and talk a little bit about kind of the goals of where we're hoping to go with the CLEAR lab? I think is the next slide.
Yeah. Oops. Sorry, a little technical difficulty here.
All right.
These videos are, okay, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think just in a quick summary, we're really, it's a wonderfully exciting lab dynamic in which we're building an interdisciplinary team from all of these perspectives to look at a common problem. And so often they're just so siloed, but in the academic setting, we're able to test ideas, work interdisciplinary, and sort of come together, centraling around really looking at how people understand the local environment and how do we change that perception in many ways. And the arts is one way and of doing things. And so engaging people through the public. And I think what we're most excited about is establishing these kind of partnerships and collaborations with places like Plymouth, with TNC, that cultivate and really allow the public to engage with their local marine environment in a way that they perhaps have never been able to experience this before. And we're using all sorts of innovative both technologies and cameras and study methods to really be able to enhance and bring that together. And, you know, as we look to the future, it's in the really very early stages right now, but it's almost like it's incubator, and we can see it beginning to take off, and are looking for ways to really expand this critical thinking and to allow really the next generation of students to even take this kind of role forward and to sort of look beyond the traditional mindset of how you engage a public and solve environmental pressing problems that relate not only to our local environment, but that have a global context as well. And I think with that, you know, we'd like to just really just express a sincere thanks to David Gould, Eric Hutchinson's, and clearly members of pardon the pun, clearly members of our CLEAR team who have been really instrumental in all of this work and are just a wonderful group of people to work with. So thank you very much. Please feel free to contact or reach out to Brian or myself at any point. And I think at this moment, we'd like to take questions. And Allison and Liz, I just want to thank you again for this opportunity for both Brian and myself to speak today. It's really wonderful. So with that, should I stop the presentation or do you want me to leave this up? Or
you can stop it, and we'll just, so we can see everybody's face. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Keith and Brian. That was really exciting. And we have plenty of time for discussion. We have some great questions that have already rolled in. If you're listening and you have a question, please go ahead and enter that into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And I'll start rolling with questions. The first one is for Keith. How did you get interested in using photography as a vehicle for helping to advance conservation?
Yeah, thanks. You know, I think that the two sort of happened side by side. You know, you ever just do something that you love and then they grew together? I've always loved being outside, being in the environment, swimming, diving, and being in the ocean. And I think that two things naturally happened. One, I liked communicating and telling people about these extraordinary places that I've been able to be. And I thought that my craft as an artist, as a photographer, to really share that was wonderful. And two, I enjoyed it so much that, you know, you feel compelled to save those things you really feel proud about. And as you learn a little bit more that things are not right, or they seem like they're ways of doing things, it became this wonderful opportunity to really share my own abilities. And I feel fortunate all the time that I get to work with people like Brian and other scientists who have expertise in an area, and where I've really been able to learn about the animals, why they're critical, and about the environment. And that has helped inform my decision and my artistry to know what to photograph and to how to photograph it, or not how to, but what to focus on in terms of the photography, so that we can relay these communication things. Because perhaps a rock at first glance isn't that significant, but if you knew something about that rock, it becomes so interesting. And it's the same way we walk through like a MoMA or a museum. Sometimes the abstraction of the work itself isn't really clear and evident, but as we begin to learn about it, we begin to appreciate the craft of what makes things so significant. So that's how I started, and I've just done it because I've loved it so much from ever beginning that I feel like I can never stop.
Excellent. A similar question for you, Brian. As a scientist and academic, how did you get interested in using art to ignite your research?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I usually describe myself as a reluctant or an accidental climate scientist. And I never very few people, at least in my generation, set out to be climate scientists. I mean, for me, it's because everything I kept studying kept dying. And so you really rapidly realize that unless you want to have a very depressing life, just cataloging things dying around you is not a great career. And so, early on, I started really getting into how do we talk about this. And then when I had kids, realized, yeah, I really need to do something about this. And it's abundantly clear that just throwing data at people is not going to move the needle. It's not going to make people understand or care. I mean, I love the quote by Jacques Cousteau that people protect what they love. And the photography and other visual arts is just a fantastic way of doing that. And I quickly realized that's not a skill set I have. I mean, if you look at my pictures, they're much worse than Keith's GoPro picture. And so I really have come to appreciate the expertise that Keith brings to this in visual storytelling. And so it, like everything else, I don't even remember how we first met, Keith. It was just a vicarious, meet and greet, and then we hit it off and like hanging out together. But the possibilities just became abundantly clear for what we could do with his skill set to talk about environmental science.
So Keith, other than Brian being really fun to hang out with, what's the ultimate goal of your collaboration?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our goals are really twofold. I think first and foremost is to use these pictures in a way and the environmental knowledge to inspire people to really make environmental change that has meaningful impact in the local communities and the health of our oceans and really environmentally the health of our planet. And little by little, we're doing that. And I think secondly is to establish this sort of larger lab and framework in terms of how can we create a model that would be used in other universities and other places, and a way of thinking really in this interdisciplinary center kind of aspect to change dynamics at a larger level and to innovate frequently through different levels of thinking and understanding. And so our real goal here is to establish the Clear Lab as a leading place for really changing people's perception and dynamic and understanding that it's multiple perspectives coming in to solve singular solutions, singular problems that have many aspects of complexity to them.
So it seems like the quality of the picture is really fundamental to the whole process. And there was that incredible photo of you with the white shark. So I'll put two questions together. Can you talk a little bit about what makes for good photography that will have the kind of impact that will really serve those goals? And were you in danger from that giant shark?
Right. Well, so first on the shark and the danger. Great white sharks are dangerous animals, and that, by no means should anyone go diving with them. I can tell you I would never do this in any way, shape, or form had I known that was a great white shark that I was going to be swimming to. I mean, first, I couldn't even see the thing until 25 feet. The shark is 16 feet. By the time it came up to me, the ocean was this vast place, and it was quickly only the shark that was there. People that you do see who dive with them in blue water, oftentimes, you can see them from a distance, but these are large predators. They are very powerful and could be potentially very dangerous. So I certainly would not do that. I think in New England, where you can't see them or know them, it's even all the more difficult. But it also shows something about the animal. They're not just a mindless killer. They're not just out there to hunt and kill every single thing. That they're a predator. They're an apex predator, and so we can also appreciate them for what they are. I'm a small little animal relative to the shark, and it's a powerful thing. And so a small bite for it would be devastating for me, but maybe just tiny for it. Anyway, they're to be admired and appreciated, and certainly would not recommend anyone doing this, nor myself. Secondly, yeah, was there a follow-up question on that, or?
Well, it's a related question about big fish. So I'll ask the question and you can decide whether to finish that point. Someone asked a really great conservation question. Keith, you had mentioned that the tuna are not as big today as they once were. Why not?
Yeah, well, let me share what I saw when I spent 3 months in the Mediterranean Sea. The fishing, the practice that was over there, they were using a Persane fishing practice. And that's basically where you loop around the fish and catch them in a big net. And on the one hand, it's a very sustainable fishing practice. You catch pretty much what you're after, especially in the case of tuna, and they release everything else because they don't want it. When we arrived on the day of the catching it in the European Union, and you can see all the complexities, I won't go into it much, but you have the European Union that's protected and has a whole bunch of policies, and then you have Africa on the other side that doesn't have the same sort of regulations. And so in there, you already have a conflict of like fishing rights and water and stuff like that. But anyway, sorry. In one day, they caught 2 times the amount of the quota they were allowed for the whole season. That's how efficient they are. And so the number of these fish that are caught is way exceeds what their capabilities are to many levels. And so people are working to protect them and to save them and to manage populations. And there's a conflict always. How many do you catch? How many do you protect? What size are they? And who's right on these kind of things? And it's not an easy solution. And believe me, I understand that there's a lot of those things. But if you look back at those pictures, you do see a real change. The fish are not as big as they used to be. And so you can't deny that there's that element that is happening there. The rest I leave to the scientists and the policymakers for how to do this. But I do think that the pictures can help convey those critical points so that when we do things, it's not just that we want to conserve it, or at least from my perspective, it's protected so that for future generations, there's always enough tuna. And so managing those types of resources. But it was clear to me that the fish are not the same size. And if you look today, there are many that have changed over that size. You asked just quickly, I'll just jump to the photography of what it takes to photograph these or what makes good pictures or whatnot. I just offer that obviously all of photography is about finding light and composition, movement, and doing things. And one of the things that I feel very fortunate about is that, again, learning from people like Brian about what is interesting helps inform how you make a layered photograph so that you have the movement of the water, the animal itself, a little bit of the background that people can connect to, that give a portrait that is an immediate response. And that can be hard to do. Right? In fact, it's very hard to do. And I spend, I can't, people always think you just go there, you take a picture and done. But the light's never right the right day. The fish never are there the right time in the right way. And the thing is that once you observe something once, then I know it's possible and I can repeat and do this. And it's not, again, just like those old historic pictures, it's not until you see other photographs that are lined up that you sometimes realize how much a connection can happen through a picture and how it can support this. And I spend endless amounts of hours just waiting and patiently prepared in a moment and able to react in a second so that those instantaneous things can happen. And that comes with the experience of knowing where and when to be. But the real craft is in being able to sort of understand the alignments of what you're looking for in terms of an image. And it's, from my perspective as a photographer, the most wonderful joy of a craft of how do you make a picture in the way that you envision it. And it's hardly ever just a picture that just comes by and gets, I mean, the great white shark happened, but I was positioning myself in such a way for those kind of things to occur. And that's really the love of photography in the making of art. With that, I'll take other questions or Brian questions.
If I can just quick jump in, I mean, there's some amazing work by a historical ecologist named Lauren McClenahan, who's gone through those photographs that are often done with fishing charters where they take photographs over and over again at the same place. And it's a really powerful example of the idea of shifting baselines where, what we perceive today to be a big fish was not a big fish 20, 30, 50 years ago. And how our perceptions of what normal is have changed over time. And so again, that's the power of photography that can provide that perspective going deeper into time as well.
Yeah, there's on this theme of evidence, where we have photographs themselves as evidence for the change in size over time. We have a couple of questions from Kent Wittenberg and from Haley Springer that I'll put together. What evidence have you found that shows that photos do change people's perceptions of themselves in the natural world? And also, what are the characteristics of photos that do that? So is it pictures with people in them, coastlines, impacts that people have caused?
Yeah, I can say from our perspective, we're just getting spun up on this. And so we were just about to get to the point where we were doing the surveys. And so, my answer to that will largely be from work that has been done from other people. But the key element seems to be how you allow the viewer to view themselves as part of the image, as being part of that perspective. I mean, there's been work done, for example, even looking at illustrations in children's books from native indigenous authors versus European authors, where the perspective of the viewer changes, for example, over the shoulder versus kind of a nice, neat framed vision of nature. There's really interesting work in the architecture field looking at just how you frame things, how you take something that's really messy and put a nice, neat frame around it. All of a sudden it becomes more palatable, but it's all about providing these entry points. And I'll shut up and let Keith weigh in here, but I think that's one key element with any of these images, is how somebody personally sees themselves connected with it.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and add that it's particularly complicated in an underwater environment. And so on land, for instance, an easy example could be you could fly a plane and you can see a whole amount of cows. You could see a forest and you can see deforestation and non. You can see boundaries of a coastline and stuff that change things. But underwater, it's much, much more difficult. You have no reference points oftentimes. The ocean is so vast, you can't even really see far enough, even in the picture itself. And so healthy coral reefs, depending on where you photograph, could have patches of this or patches of that kind of thing. So the differences between the two are very difficult to see changes over time. And these fishing becomes a good example of where they're out of the water with people with them, or at the counts of them, because it's at a point we can see, weigh, and measure them. But in their natural environment, it's much more difficult, and not all places in the ocean are equally the same. There's some spots where the currents converge, and there are places that are much more dynamic than other parts. And so that adds to the complexity of the two. And I think we are trying to understand better of how people are impacted and influenced by images. I mean, certainly from, seeing the popularity of, programs, TV shows, images, social media. I mean, a new visual language almost is emerging through social media, in which pictures are telling stories. So we see how impacted people are by those. And I think that they can, help tell a perspective that that can hopefully help people understand some of the problems that are there. But the underwater environment definitely complicates things.
Thank you. There's a question here from Judy Depew that I think picks up on, you had mentioned the Indigenous perspective, Brian, both in your talk and in the answer to that last question. And Judy asks, it seems like we're rediscovering the perspective that Indigenous people had all along. Has there been an effort to acknowledge or incorporate that history in your work?
Yeah, our collaborator, John Coley, has done a lot of work in that area. We probably can't bring him on right now, but I think it's been very much in the direction of we're trying to learn from that Indigenous perspective. But we would love, as we move forward to this, to figure out how can we incorporate that into these efforts we have to try to change hearts and minds, to bring in Indigenous peoples as partners, to take what that culture is known for a very long time, and use it to influence kind of more Western culture.
Anything to add to that, Keith?
I would just, highlight that I think the town of Plymouth, in addition, has relationships with them, the Wampanoag, and I think that clearly understanding the history and people is first and foremost, and we are looking to learn from cultures and people, and ways to integrate everyone into a project that makes things better.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I mean, I think it's an important element to consider, is that in order to do this right and to learn from many different cultures that to weigh in here, it's a really slow process. And so that's part of why we're so eager to develop these partnerships, is not so much for us to spew out our material, but to listen and to try to learn. I mean, there's a lot we can learn from urban cultures and peoples as well, in the same respect.
So there are all kinds of opportunities for partnerships. I know that the the public and our listeners have some opportunities. Janet McCausland writes that she's been a volunteer with the Middleborough Lakeville Herring Run and is an underwater photographer. Can you talk a little bit about what people listening can do to support your projects?
Yeah, at this point, I think looking in the comments, Eric Hutchins, who's on the call, put in some links for people to participate in the herring counts that are there each year and World Fish Migration Day. I think as far as working with us, as we get this spun up, we're going to be looking for community partners. We're going to be looking for community involvement. Our plan is to involve citizen scientists. And so I think it's, please do stay in touch. You have our contact information. And so as the center gets rolling, we'll love to work with you. Keith, do you have more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, if people are interested in organizations, certainly that would be wonderful. We're in a really early phase of our lab developing, and so partnerships helping would be wonderful. One of the things as an artist and a photographer that's always difficult is how do you get out to go photograph these animals? How do you get the time and resources to be able to do those things? And these are the challenges that also impact projects like this, lab work like this. And so these are the exciting opportunities and outcomes, and we're looking to grow this all together. And it's, really just, exciting on all levels. So anyone interested, please let us know.
Yeah, I feel like we're making excuses for what we haven't done, but as is often true, in order to make this work, we have yet to get a large scale funder for this. It's been really difficult because we're bridging between traditional science and arts organizations, and so a lot of this has been a collaboration that we have cobbled together with some university support and student volunteers. But it's part of why this has been kind of a slow spin up, is we're trying to do this without really resources to do it.
Okay, well, we're approaching the end of our time today. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Sure, I can jump in. I think first and foremost, I say, I'd like to encourage first anyone who wants to reach out, please do. But secondly, I think for those who are photographers, I encourage everyone to enjoy the art of photography, to go out to places and to see things and to photograph it. I think it's really wonderful to enjoy being in nature and that appreciation. And that just add that there are many. I feel fortunate that I volunteered starting at the aquarium and work with conservation organizations. And so I am sure that anyone who wants to get involved with like a TNC or any of these organizations, that was always a wonderful part for me. And I think a good way to get involved in doing things locally that can help where you live and the wildlife there.
And I would also add, check out, if you haven't seen it, ichange.org. So it's a community science organization that uses things like photographs that people take and then puts them together in a way that you would never see patterns just on your own, but when you're part of a larger team can do that. So there are a number of wonderful community science organizations out there. So a lot of the work we do is with Museum of Science Boston, and our partners there have been fantastic building in community science as well.
How can people stay up to date with your work?
You can go to clear.northeastern.edu would be the best way to do it, or probably more directly shoot an email to me or to Keith.
Terrific. And we'll make sure to get that contact information out to folks so that they know where to find you.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in for your support of the Nature Conservancy. Your support is what makes all of this work possible. We'll be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days with links to the resources we talked about today and a recording of this webinar. If you're enjoying our webinars, please share them with your friends or make a donation to support our work. It's easy. You can donate via the link in the chat. You can also follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with our work and get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with us. If you like content on river herring, rivers, and oceans, you can follow me on Twitter at Allison_Bowden. And better yet, get outside and see the river herring as they arrive across our coast on their spring migration. If you're more into the comfort of your couch, you can help count them. And we'll make sure you get the links for that. Eric Hutchins kindly put them into the chat. You can count Town Brook, you can count Mystic River, and that's actually a great contribution to the conservation of river herring. Also from your couch, you can join us next Thursday, March 25th, for a conversation with Springfield Museum art curator Maggie North. Maggie will talk about the role of land and landscape in American art history and about how art has been used to advance land preservation and conservation. So the land side of the intersection of art and science. As always, you can find the latest webinar schedule and register at nature.org/MA webinars. Thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful afternoon.